Aikui, Nakna Malita, and this is my channel, The Midnight Librarian. Today I will be talking about my 2020 reading stats. So in the year of 2020, I read 69 books, which is fantastic. I had set my Goodreads reading goal for 45, just because at the beginning of 2020, I had definitely wanted to read more tomes. Apologies for the lighting in here. I'm using natural light and it looks to be very sunny today and my camera can't seem to figure out the white balance. Anyway, I chose 40 or 45 books as my reading goal on Goodreads, just because I had wanted to kind of just take it easy on myself. In previous years, I've set it to 52, which is about one book per week, which in the past I've kind of struggled with. I usually end up having to bust out a couple of smaller books towards the end of the year. 2020, I wanted to read longer books. And wanted to give myself that leeway of just kind of giving myself time to read them. To keep track of my books, I do use the spreadsheet that Allie from Hardback Hoarder creates every year, which I am so grateful for. I use that a lot. I found it's so much easier. And in fact, she put the one out for 2021 and it has a couple more edits to it that so far I am really enjoying. I'm really excited to use it. So if you are looking for a reading tracker, I highly suggest you check out her channel and possibly tip or donate to her, because she is doing this for free. However, paying or tipping her would really help in terms of paying her for her time to do this. So just throwing that out there. So like I said, I read 69 books, which equates to 22,003 pages. 34 of those books were physical, 32 were audio, and 3 were ebooks. Genres, I read 13 nonfiction, 13 fantasy, 20 contemporary, 13 historical, 3 horror, 5 mystery thrillers, 1 classic, and 1 poetry collection. I did kind of just go bare minimum or bare essentially for putting things into the genres, because I know that in particular there's a couple of books in there where I weren't quite sure where to put them, and so backing up further, know that there's things that could easily go into various different pieces. And particularly with fantasy, I know I put most of my sci-fi in there. It's very generic just to make it easier. In terms of the target audience that I read for, I read 25 adult, 28 young adult, 4 middle grade, and 2 children's. And then my ratings: 7 5 stars, 5 4.5 stars, 26 4 stars, 7 3.5 stars, 15 3 stars, 1 2.5 star, 7 2 stars, 0 1.5 stars, and 1 star. I also DNF'd 2 books this year. I feel like these ratings are actually pretty good in terms of I've read a lot in the middle of the road for me, of just they weren't necessarily the best, but they weren't bad. And in terms of some of the books that were bad, I don't necessarily regret reading them all the way through. There was just a couple of books in general that I had tried to read, gave it 50 to 100 pages, and just could not see myself finishing either of them. And then in terms of own voices, so I try to keep track of this as well as I could, but some authors just don't put in what they are in terms of ethnicity, so that becomes not only ethnicity but sexuality or gender preference, and really that's on them to say. So really it's none of our business, but it is curious to see, just in general, it is possible to research in just how many own voices books we read. And for me, it was kind of split pretty evenly from what I was able to decipher. I read just a bit over 50% of Own Voices books, which I feel like a lot of that was like about summer onward, just because I was more aware in summer. That's when I started my booktube channel, that's when I started my Instagram, and was invited into an indigenous bookstagram community that really opened my eyes to more books and more authors. So I thought that was a pretty cool. I hope to either keep that or bump it up more in 2021. So we'll definitely have to see. Now, for my main goal in 2020, which was to read more tomes, I did read 6, which is more than I thought, actually. So I consider a tome anything over 500 pages. And I read 6 of them. So I think a lot of them too. So it really just depends. And I think audiobooks are what saved me in this, because a couple of them were audiobooks, I believe. Either way, a tome intimidates me, whether it's physical or an audiobook. Mostly because there's one thing to see a giant brick in my TBR stack, but it's also another to look at an audiobook and go, that's 24 hours. What? And I listened to my audiobooks on 1.25 speed. I found that 1.5 speed is just too fast for me, and I end up getting distracted by that weird higher pitch that the voice narration tends to be at when you up the speed of it. That helps in a way, but it's like it's still intimidating to see that number of just like, oh my goodness. So let's break my reading down month by month for the year of 2020. All the books that have the pages facing out are books that I either have gotten rid of already or that I didn't have a physical copy for and read through my library. I'm going to avoid using phrases like best or worst months, just because that differs from person to person, and for me personally, it's not going to be in terms of quantity or quality necessarily. If we look at these months quantitatively, the lowest amount of books I read was March, with 1 book highlighted in turquoise, and the most amount of books I read was July, with 9 books highlighted in yellow. I would have to say that I think reading shorter books in order to complete a readathon definitely benefited in terms of reading more, which is something I'm already finding I'm doing in 2021, is that I happen to be reading shorter books. This is not a good thing nor a bad thing. It's just something I've tend to notice. I would also like to say that just because I read 1 book in March does not necessarily mean that that was a bad month for me. I am happy to have read any books in any given month, considering it was 2020. Though, with that in mind, if we look at this qualitatively, by the average ratings, March is at the lowest with an average of 2, and August is at the highest with the average of 4.3. But again, that doesn't mean either one of these are inherently good or bad. Yes, I did not entirely enjoy our dark duet, but that doesn't necessarily mean that August was necessarily a good month of reading. I just happened to read more than March. If we look at this in terms of my favorite and least favorite, I would have to say that based off my opinion, June was probably my least favorite month, as it had a lot more disappointing reads for me, while November was my favorite month, as it had books that I was excited for and that I was surprised by. So what I ultimately like doing is just looking at this grid and trying to figure out why I did certain things. So like January and February felt like any typical year. I feel like in the past, this was my average of 3-4 books per month, and I would struggle to hit 52 books, which was my typical goal. March ultimately felt like a shit show if you're in the United States, because that's when a large portion of us got hit by the pandemic. That's when my county in particular went into quarantine. That's when I was stressed out the most. And so I picked up a book that inherently disappointed me, and I just didn't feel like reading. My reading starts to pick up in April. I think just because we had more time on our hands, we were figuring things out, how to work from home. And it was essentially a way to escape the stress that was happening in life. I've always tried to read diversely before, but I think I definitely noticed come July that my reading gets even more diverse. Particularly, this is when I started my Instagram, started my booktube channel, as I mentioned before, and was invited to the Indigenous Instagram book reviewers group. And like I said, that just opened my eyes to more books, more releases, more authors that I wasn't privy to before. And shout out to them. They're really the all-stars of keeping me on my toes and eager to read more books and genres that I'm loving. Particularly when it came to opportunities like reading Black Sun as an ARC, as well as Elatsoe and Apple. It's just been an amazing last 6 months because of them. So the next thing I want to look at is the source of the reading that I did in 2020. So these numbers are going to overlap because there are a few library books that after reading, I wanted physical copies for my own personal library. Same with advanced reader copies that I got sent from publishers. I wanted a finished copy either because I wanted to support the author or because the finished copy had some content that the advanced reader's copy did not. So those numbers are going to overlap. But if we look, I read 22 books, or 27.5% of the books I owned already prior to 2020. 17 of these books, or 21.3%, were from the library. 35 or 43.8% I bought in 2020. 4 or 5% were advanced readers copies sent to me by publishers, and 2 or 2.5% were gifted to me. So I definitely like to change this possibly. One thing I'd like to do in particular is support my local library a bit more. I only just joined my library during the pandemic and have been able to get an electronic library card, which allows me to listen to Libby through my library, which we didn't have for a while because I remember looking a couple of times. So I decided to do a library breakdown just to see how I did on this. So basically I wanted to look at and see how many library books that I listened to or read and eventually bought, or that I had already owned and were already on my TBR, versus just library books that I just listened to through the library and didn't necessarily have it on my physical TBR, just wanted to enjoy and indulge. So with that, 10 of the library books that I read from the library were strictly in the library. I did not buy them. They were good, but not necessarily good enough for me to really want them to be in my library. 6 I already owned and just wanted to knock them off my TBR, and through either by listening to them, and 6 I bought. So it's actually not too bad. I'm actually pretty happy with this. I would like to get the owned portion up a bit, but I'm not mad about this. And this one I just wanted to do it out of my own curiosity. I don't plan on changing it in any way. I don't tend to pay attention to it unless it's a new release, but these are dates these books were published. So 35.5% of the books I read in 2020 were published in 2020. 59.7% were published between the dates of 2010 and 2019. 3.2% were published between 2000 and 2010, and 1.6% was published pre-2000s. And it's just overall interesting to me, just because the two that were published between 2000 and 2010 were two nonfiction books, and my one pre-2000 was a classic. So it's just overall interesting to me. So yeah, those are my stats for my reading in 2020. Hopefully this is something that you are interested in. I know it's curious to me. I'm hoping that next year I can do this a bit better and a bit more organized. What was an interesting reading stat that you figured out if you do this with your reading? What's an interesting one that you found out for 2020? Otherwise, check out my links in my Raise Awareness section of my description. It'll have links to MMIWG2S, which is Missing Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit People. Share and donate where you can. Otherwise, I hope that you are in the mental mindset to enjoy your reading. I will talk to you again soon. Chew.